presenting on behalf of Martha on some research that we worked on last year. And Martha, and here's a lovely picture of her, is one of our graduates at GCU in international marketing. And she was very much challenging us on what we were doing about the climate crisis and seeking climate justice from the perspective that if marketing can be blamed for causing overconsumption, then perhaps it can be part of the solution as well. This time last year, Martha was on the streets of Glasgow for COP26, demanding change. And we were fortunate at that time that she was able to do some research to find out what those young climate activists thought about the way in which the fast fashion industry was promoting their efforts towards sustainability. And this, she felt, was a gap in the literature, this idea that we've got brands like H&M and New Look who are addressing sustainability and using that kind of terminology like carbon neutrality, circular economy, in a way that perhaps wasn't authentically applied to their supply chain management or production. And she felt that those nods towards sustainability were in fact an effort to align to young consumers' concerns for the climate crisis. But she also felt that they were disingenuous and that overall, this wasn't a positive approach for fast fashion marketing retailers to take, because young people who are more aware of the climate crisis and have been educated in aspects of sustainability, often from their years in nursery and all through their school education and into higher education as well, might just call them out for greenwashing. So the objectives of this research was to examine the perception of climate-aware students who were part of Generation Z. And as said, this is a generation really that have been educated in sustainability from very young. The eco-school application of sustainability and acknowledgement for the Sustainable Development Goals is a global phenomenon, and have educated those young people in the importance of the issues and also terminologies that apply to sustainability. We were able to get those climate-aware students because Martha was very much engaged through COP26 in Glasgow with climate activists, and often they were students within one of the 4 universities that we have in Glasgow. She also wanted to look at their views in response of the way in which sustainability was being addressed, particularly the role of businesses in tackling the climate crisis, who are often alleged of inappropriate practice that has an impact on the climate, and to explore what climate crisis students identify as important for those business claims and marketing strategies. And specifically to look at how they are considering greenwashing within the fashion industry. And she was looking at H&M and New Look in particular because of the way in which they dressed their shop windows during COP26 to illustrate the ways in which they were responding to the sustainability issues. So this was an interpretive research approach. It's exploratory in nature because there's very little known about the way in which consumers cognitively assess those sustainability claims by fast fashion retailers. We know that increasingly those retailers are addressing them, but what we're not really sure of is how are these claims being interpreted by particularly younger people who are the focus of fast fashion marketing. Inductive semi-structured interviews were utilised because we had reviewed the previous literature and identified facets for further investigation, and the previous literature was used to construct the questions within the interviews, but they were open sufficiently to allow what Martha referred to as a democratic approach in the participants' responses. Because we wanted to address climate activists within the student population. It was a purpose, convenience and homogeneous sampling approach that was adopted. And the data were analysed thematically, and we are going to present those themes and selected quotations to you. So whilst it's a limitation that we have this small homogeneous sample, it also offered richer insights and a specific lens through which we can understand the data. And for example, all our participants were students within Glasgow, although not all from Glasgow. They were from various places within Europe. They were all white, which has, again, it takes a kind of global north perspective. And from that, there were almost taking responsibility for driving the issues, because they felt that the behaviour of retailers within the global north, fast fashion retailers, adopted a neo-colonial perspective, and this was something that they felt that they wanted to disrupt and redirect in a more positive way, a more globally equal way to do that. So we developed this conceptual framework which led the development of the questions that we wanted to ask. We were making assumptions that this were a cohort who are globally connected, and mainly this is through social media. They have mass information that they have at the touch of a screen that they have access to, and they can hear and see what's going on in various places in the world. So they are globally connected and globally aware of what's happening with the climate crisis. They are also the generation who are going to be most impacted by the climate crisis, but they're also future leaders, business leaders and politics leaders as well, driving forward a way in which we can mitigate the consequences of the kind of climate crisis. Because they went to higher education, we're making the assumption that they are critical thinkers, which is an attribute that comes from within higher education, but also that they've had this embedded knowledge of sustainability throughout their educational years. And this, of course, all of this makes them much more climate aware and focused on the problems and what needs to be addressed. So this was all informed by extant literature, and the references are there for anyone who wants to follow them up. The research was framed looking at corporate environmental responsibility as a marketing strategy, but also as a theoretical understanding of the ways in which businesses were addressing the sustainability issue, and in particular fast fashion retailers. And Martha has taken a couple of pictures from the ways in which those fast fashion retailers were addressing sustainability during COP26, when there was a global focus on Glasgow, just as there is just now in Egypt, and concern for the way in which we are tackling the climate crisis. So we know that there's an issue with fast fashion and sustainability. Its impact on the climate is said to be bigger than the aviation industry, but the fashion industry is also important in a number of different ways, particularly for global employment and global economies as well. So when our participants considered the way in which fast fashion retailers were addressing sustainability, they were fairly sceptical in the way in which this was communicated. And they actually felt that rather than addressing political markets and the ways in which you would shape the kind of world within what you wanted to live, they were more likely to use their economic voting power by avoiding buying into fast fashion. So you can see here that one of the participants says, in terms of regular clothes shopping, I try not to buy into fast fashion. If I buy something that's not used, I make sure it's of a higher quality, and then I avoid shopping when I don't need to. So to an extent, they were adopting voluntary simplicity, which emerges from sustainability education in terms of reduce, reuse and recycle. They also were very critical of those kind of sustainability claims that were provided by fast fashion retailers. And you can see from the top quote here that they think that they're just being applied as a marketing tool. And it's very unfair to the brands that are actually doing something intrinsically to address sustainability, something that's perhaps part of the DNA of a brand in addressing sustainability. And fast fashion retailers are just jumping onto this kind of bandwagon of sustainability without actually implementing sustainability principles within all supply chain management. And they were also critical of this working economy and critical of the notion of capital growth. And although they expected that that's what fast fashion businesses were, the whole purpose of them was to increase market share and to stimulate growth and consumption. They felt that this was disingenuous and it didn't actually tackle the issues of what was addressed. And they concluded really that there was a lot of misinformation provided by fast fashion retailers. So the other quote here is that they're acknowledging that the purpose of a fast fashion retailer is to make profit, and they're not a charity, but they're recognizing that the issues are bigger, and unless there is regulation implemented that prevents misleading claims and also forces fast fashion businesses to consider the way in which the business is sustainable, then they can't see that there'll be any change within that. This idea of greenwashing was actually led into the participants considering that they were a lie, that the businesses were lying. And this was reflected on the way in which the windows were dressed for those fast fashion retailers in Glasgow last year. So you can see the top quote here is the participant is claiming that it's just a lie. Although you can't blame the company, they're simply doing what they're built to do, which is maximize profit and not really taking a moral acknowledgement to what their industry is doing globally to the planet. But they also said that when fast fashion retailers indicated sustainability within supply chain management, this was also a lie, because they felt that you can't have one collection that addresses sustainability whilst all other production contributes to the climate crisis. So we've got this middle participant here saying, are you a fast fashion company or is this not fast fashion? How can you do fast fashion without doing fast fashion? So they felt that one collection or one nod towards sustainability whilst continuing business as usual was actually just a lie and therefore not authentically applied throughout. And because they also had this greater understanding of what the terminology around sustainability was, they were looking for substance within those claims. So this bottom participant here says, well, you say planet-friendly fashion, but what does that mean? How is it planet-friendly? And they wanted more transparency and information to better understand this. So what we can learn from this research is that there's this younger generation are much more vocal in their concerns for the climate crisis, quite rightly too, because they are the generation that are going to be responsible for moving forward in such a way that we can protect planetary resources for the future of humanity. They were very critical of the economic systems that they felt were simply orientated towards growth and profit generation and not recognising the Earth's resources and maximising those to live within the planetary means in which we have. They were demanding much more from business and government. They wanted proper recognition of the issues and authentic efforts to implement policy and business regulations that would tackle the issues. And they also wanted more transparency within their marketing. They felt that disingenuous claims that didn't make any sense needed to be reconsidered, and they wanted the claims to be implemented and evidence of that implementation through all aspects of production and supply chain management. And these are our references coming up. But first of all, the paper appeals to global advertising community The idea that Martha had from the beginning, that if marketing can be blamed for the way in which it's impacted upon overconsumption, then perhaps it can be repositioned in such a way to encourage consumers to think about the climate crisis and their own behaviours, and to recognise those as tenets of value within marketing. And they also want to appeal to policymakers who should be leading change in an authentic manner, and not those, as Greta Thunberg suggests, fairy tales of economic growth, but to recognise that carbon emissions and environmental actions are imperative for the future. Recommendations for future research are that this was a small cohort, and although the novelty is that it was focused around climate activists during COP26, obviously it's not generalisable within the wider population, but it would be good to look more closely at Generation Z to understand what the impact that their knowledge and the sustainability education may have for the way on which they expect businesses to operate in the future, and the way that that might impact on politics and global politics then on after. It also asks for a closer look at the ways in which businesses are greenwashing, and to understand how this is interpreted by consumers. Martha's provided her information here if anyone wants to catch up with her to get more information about the research that she carried out and the research and work that she's already doing around climate activism. And those are our references. Thank you.